Joseph was the favored son of Jacob, born to him in his old age from Rachel, the wife he loved most. Unlike his brothers who toiled in the fields, Joseph was given a coat of many colors, a symbol of his father's affection and a mark of distinction. This favoritism did not go unnoticed, and his older brothers harbored resentment. They saw in him not only the arrogance of a privileged son, but also the looming possibility that he would one day rule over them. One night, Joseph had a dream that set the course of his life in motion. In his dream, he saw himself and his brothers binding sheaves in a field, and suddenly his sheaf stood upright, while his brothers' sheaves bowed down to it. When he recounted the dream to his family, his brothers' envy grew, and even Jacob was troubled by the implication. Joseph had another dream in which the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him, a vision suggesting that his entire family would one day acknowledge his supremacy. His father rebuked him, questioning whether he and Joseph's mother would also bow before him. But he kept the matter in his heart, pondering the significance of these dreams. Joseph's dreams were not mere figments of his imagination. They were divinely inspired messages foretelling his destiny. However, the manner in which he shared them with his family only fueled the hostility of his brothers. They already despised him for their father's favoritism, and his dreams further solidified their belief that Joseph saw himself as superior to them. The tension between Joseph and his brothers grew as time passed. While they labored tirelessly under the scorching sun, Joseph was often seen in his elaborate coat, a stark reminder of their father's special affection for him. This coat was not just a garment. It symbolized authority and a distinction from the rest of his family. It signified a level of status that none of his brothers could attain, making their animosity towards him even more intense. Despite their resentment, Joseph remained blissfully unaware of the depth of his brothers' hatred. He continued to share his thoughts openly, not realizing how his words wounded them. His dreams, which should have been a source of revelation and wisdom, became the very thing that pushed his brothers to the brink of betrayal. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were tending the flocks in Shechem. As Joseph approached them in the distance, they saw him coming and their hatred boiled over. This was their opportunity. Away from their father's watchful eyes, they could rid themselves of the dreamer once and for all. Before Joseph even reached them, they plotted his demise. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them sneered. "Let us kill him and throw him into a pit. We will say a wild beast has devoured him. Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." Reuben, the eldest, though not free from jealousy, could not bring himself to allow his brother's murder. He suggested instead that they throw Joseph into a dry well, intending to rescue him later and return him to their father. His plan, however, did not unfold as he had hoped. As Joseph arrived, his brothers seized him, stripping him of his precious coat. The very symbol of his favored status was torn from him in an act of violent resentment. They cast him into the empty cistern, where he lay bruised and terrified, his mind racing as he tried to understand how the love of his family had turned into such cruelty. While Reuben was away, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passed by on their way to Egypt. Seeing an opportunity, Judah proposed selling Joseph rather than killing him. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed, and for 20 pieces of silver, they sold Joseph into slavery. Joseph's cries for mercy fell on deaf ears. He was bound and led away, his mind swirling with confusion, fear, and betrayal. He had left his home that morning as a beloved son, confident in his place within his family, and by nightfall he was a slave bound for a foreign land. The dreams that once filled him with hope and promise now seemed distant and cruelly ironic. Back home, the brothers devised a plan to deceive their father. They slaughtered a goat and dipped Joseph's coat in its blood, presenting it to Jacob as evidence of his son's tragic fate. Upon seeing the bloodied garment, Jacob was inconsolable. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for days. "I will go to my grave in mourning for my son," he wept, refusing any comfort from his family. As Jacob grieved, Joseph journeyed toward Egypt, shackled and uncertain of what lay ahead. But though he did not know it yet, his trials were part of a divine plan. The dreamer was about to enter a world where his faith, wisdom, and resilience would be tested like never before. Joseph's arrival in Egypt marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter in his life. Torn away from his home, betrayed by those he trusted most, he faced an uncertain fate in a foreign land. The traders who had purchased him saw him as nothing more than a commodity, another slave to be sold for a profit. He was paraded through the bustling streets of Egypt, a land of towering pyramids, powerful rulers, and an advanced civilization unlike anything he had known. His destination was the slave market, where men and women were auctioned to the highest bidder. Joseph, though bruised and weary, stood tall. He had lost everything, his family, his freedom, and his status, but he still carried within him the knowledge of his dreams. Though he did not understand why he had been placed in such a lowly position, he held on to the belief that his life had a greater purpose. Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and the captain of the guard, took notice of Joseph. Unlike other buyers who looked upon slaves as mere property, Potiphar saw something different in this young Hebrew. He saw intelligence, strength, and a presence that set Joseph apart. Deciding that such a slave could be useful, he purchased Joseph and brought him into his household. Thus began Joseph's life in Potiphar's house. Though he started as a mere servant, it quickly became evident that he possessed exceptional abilities. He managed household affairs with precision, earning Potiphar's trust. Before long, he was placed in charge of the entire household, overseeing everything from finances to logistics. Potiphar saw that everything Joseph touched prospered, and he recognized that his success was due to divine favor. But Joseph's rise in Potiphar's house was not without peril. Potiphar's wife, a woman of beauty and influence, took notice of him. Day after day, she attempted to seduce him, luring him with promises and flattering words. Yet Joseph, a man of integrity, resisted her advances. He knew that to betray his master's trust would be wrong, and more importantly, he could not sin against his God. One day, when no one else was in the house, Potiphar's wife seized him by his garment and demanded that he lie with her. Joseph fled, leaving his garment in her hands. Humiliated and enraged, she twisted the truth, accusing him of trying to assault her. When Potiphar heard her words, his rage knew no bounds. Without trial or explanation, Joseph was thrown into the dark confines of prison, his hard-earned position stripped from him in an instant. Yet even in prison, Joseph found favor. The prison warden, seeing his wisdom and trustworthiness, placed him in charge of the other prisoners. Little did Joseph know that his journey, though fraught with hardship, was leading him ever closer to the fulfillment of his dreams. This was an unusual privilege for a foreign slave, but there was something about Joseph that set him apart from all others. Joseph's imprisonment was a test of his faith and resilience. Stripped of his freedom and cast into the darkness of a foreign prison, he could have easily succumbed to despair. Yet he did not. He held on to his belief in the divine plan, trusting that even in the depths of misfortune, he was not forgotten. The prison where Joseph was held was not just any dungeon. It was the king's prison, reserved for those who had fallen out of favor with Pharaoh. It was a place where hope was often extinguished, yet Joseph's light shone brightly even there. One day, two high-ranking officials from Pharaoh's court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, were thrown into prison. Both had committed offenses against their ruler and were awaiting their fate. In the course of their imprisonment, each of them had troubling dreams, which left them anxious and uncertain. Seeing their distress, Joseph inquired about their dreams and, with divine inspiration, offered interpretations. The cupbearer recounted his dream first. "In my dream, I saw a vine with 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms came out, and its clusters ripened into grapes. I had Pharaoh's cup in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened carefully and replied, "The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will restore you to your position, and you will once again place the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But when you are restored, remember me and mention me to Pharaoh that I may be released from this prison." Encouraged by the favorable interpretation, the chief baker eagerly shared his own dream. "In my dream, I had 3 baskets of bread on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph's expression darkened as he delivered the interpretation. "The 3 baskets also represent 3 days, but within 3 days Pharaoh will execute you, and the birds will eat your flesh." The tension in the prison was palpable as the prisoners awaited their fate. Just as Joseph had predicted, on the 3rd day, Pharaoh celebrated his birthday by restoring the chief cupbearer to his former position and executing the chief baker. But despite Joseph's request, the cupbearer forgot him, leaving him languishing in prison for another 2 years. Despite the prolonged hardship, Joseph remained steadfast. Then one night, Pharaoh himself was troubled by dreams that no one in his court could interpret. He saw 7 healthy cows emerge from the Nile, followed by 7 gaunt, sickly cows that devoured them. Then, in a second dream, he saw 7 full, ripe ears of grain, followed by 7 withered ears that swallowed up the healthy ones. None of Pharaoh's magicians or wise men could explain these visions, and his distress grew. At that moment, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and spoke of his ability to interpret dreams. Pharaoh summoned Joseph from the prison. After years of captivity, Joseph was brought before the ruler of Egypt. He was cleaned, dressed, and presented to Pharaoh. Pharaoh recounted his dreams, and Joseph, giving credit to God, interpreted them. The 7 fat cows and 7 full ears of grain represent 7 years of great abundance in Egypt. But the 7 gaunt cows and 7 withered ears represent 7 years of famine that will follow. The famine will be so severe that the abundance will be forgotten. Pharaoh was struck by Joseph's wisdom and insight. But Joseph did not merely interpret the dreams, he also provided a solution. Pharaoh should appoint a wise and discerning man to oversee the land of Egypt, he advised. During the 7 years of plenty, let him store up grain so that there will be food available when the famine comes. Pharaoh, recognizing Joseph's intelligence and divine favor, made a remarkable decision. "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people shall submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In an instant, Joseph went from prisoner to ruler. Pharaoh gave him a signet ring, fine garments, and a chariot. He bestowed upon him an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, and arranged for his marriage to Asenath, the daughter of a prominent Egyptian priest. With these honors, Joseph fully embraced his new role as Egypt's second-in-command, overseeing the nation's preparations for the coming famine. For the next 7 years, Joseph worked tirelessly, storing grain in vast quantities. Cities were built to house the surplus food, ensuring that Egypt would not suffer during the years of hardship. Under Joseph's guidance, the land thrived. Joseph's elevation from prisoner to ruler was nothing short of miraculous. Only a day before, he was languishing in a dungeon, forgotten by those he had helped. Now he stood beside Pharaoh himself, adorned in fine garments and entrusted with the fate of an empire. The transformation was astonishing, but Joseph accepted his new role with grace, recognizing that his trials had prepared him for this very moment. Pharaoh wasted no time in putting Joseph's wisdom to the test. The land was still experiencing abundance, and it was Joseph's responsibility to ensure that the surplus was stored wisely. With meticulous planning, he oversaw the construction of massive granaries across Egypt. He implemented a taxation system that required a portion of the harvest to be set aside, ensuring that when the famine arrived, there would be more than enough to sustain the nation. Joseph traveled extensively throughout Egypt, inspecting the fields, meeting with local leaders, and ensuring that the grain storage was executed efficiently. His reputation as a wise and just leader grew, and the people came to respect and admire him. He was no longer just a Hebrew slave. He was a man of vision, a savior of Egypt, and a leader whose every decision shaped the course of the kingdom. During this time, Joseph also started a family. Pharaoh arranged his marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On. Together, they had 2 sons. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, meaning, "God has made me forget all my hardship in my father's house," and his second son Ephraim, meaning, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Though his heart still longed for his family, Joseph found solace in the new life he had built. As the years of abundance came to an end, just as Joseph had predicted, the land began to wither. The once fertile fields turned barren, and the people grew desperate for sustenance. Soon, cries of hunger filled the cities, and Pharaoh's subjects turned to their leader for relief. And when the famine finally struck, Egypt was ready. The famine spread beyond Egypt, affecting neighboring lands, including Canaan, where Joseph's family still lived. The hunger forced Jacob to send his sons to Egypt to buy grain. Little did they know that the brother they had betrayed now held their fate in his hands. Thus, Joseph's trials in Egypt transformed him into a leader, paving the way for a dramatic reunion with his family and the ultimate fulfillment of his dreams. Fortunately, Joseph had prepared well. The storehouses were overflowing, and Egypt became the sole supplier of grain in the entire region. Word of Egypt's abundance spread far and wide, drawing travelers from neighboring lands seeking food. Among those who journeyed to Egypt were 10 men from Canaan, Joseph's brothers. They had come at their father Jacob's behest, unaware that the powerful governor they sought an audience with was the very brother they had betrayed years before. Joseph recognized them the moment they bowed before him, fulfilling the dream he had as a boy. But they did not recognize him. Gone was the youthful, naive Joseph they had sold into slavery. In his place stood a man of authority, dressed in the fine robes of Egyptian royalty, speaking in the tongue of the land. Rather than reveal himself immediately, Joseph tested them. He accused them of being spies, forcing them to explain their presence. "We are 12 brothers," they answered, "sons of one man in the land of Canaan. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father." Hearing this, Joseph devised a plan. He demanded that they return with their youngest brother as proof of their honesty, keeping one of them, Simeon, as collateral. He loaded their sacks with grain, secretly returning their silver as well, and sent them on their way. Upon returning home, the brothers recounted the ordeal to Jacob, who was grief-stricken at the thought of losing yet another son. But as the famine worsened, he had no choice but to send them back, this time with Benjamin, his youngest and most beloved son. When Joseph saw Benjamin, his heart swelled with emotion, but he maintained his composure. He invited his brothers to dine with him, treating them with unexpected kindness. Yet, he had one final test in mind. He instructed his servants to place his silver cup in Benjamin's sack, and, as they departed, he had them stopped and accused of theft. The brothers were horrified when the cup was discovered in Benjamin's possession. They pleaded for mercy, and Judah, in a moment of selflessness, offered himself in place of Benjamin. This display of loyalty and repentance moved Joseph deeply. Unable to maintain his disguise any longer, he sent his attendants away and wept before his brothers. "I am Joseph," he finally revealed. "Is my father still alive?" His brothers stood in stunned silence, overcome with fear and guilt. But Joseph reassured them, saying, "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Joseph's rise from prison to palace had been part of a greater plan. Though he had suffered, it was all to ensure the survival of his family and the fulfillment of God's promise. He embraced his brothers, forgiving them for their betrayal, and invited them to settle in Egypt under his protection. The moment Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers was one filled with emotion and disbelief. The men who once sold him into slavery now stood before him, trembling, unable to comprehend how the brother they had betrayed had risen to such power in Egypt. The air was thick with tension, but Joseph's heart was filled with love, not vengeance. Seeing their fear, he spoke gently, "Do not be afraid. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But do not be distressed or angry with yourselves, for God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." Tears streamed down Joseph's face as he stepped forward, embracing his brothers one by one. They, too, wept, overcome with both joy and sorrow. The pain of the past was still present, but Joseph's words offered them something they had long thought unattainable: redemption. He continued, "It was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler over all Egypt. Now, hurry back to my father and tell him of my position. Bring him here, so that he may not suffer in the famine." The brothers, still in shock, nodded eagerly, realizing the magnitude of the moment. Joseph ordered his attendants to provide them with carts, provisions, and fine garments for the journey. He even gifted Benjamin, his youngest brother, 5 times the amount given to the others, a gesture of deep affection. Back in Canaan, Jacob, their father, could hardly believe the news when his sons returned. Joseph is alive. He is governor over all of Egypt. His old heart, weary from years of grief, struggled to accept such a reality. But when he saw the carts and the wealth Joseph had sent, his spirit revived. "It is enough. My son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die." Soon, Jacob and the entire household of Israel moved to Egypt, where they were reunited. With that, Jacob gathered his entire household, his sons, their wives, children, and livestock, and set out for Egypt. The journey was long, but anticipation filled the air. Upon arriving in Goshen, where Joseph had arranged for them to settle, father and son finally stood face to face. Joseph embraced his father and wept for a long time. Jacob, overwhelmed with emotion, said, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph led his family to meet Pharaoh, who graciously welcomed them, granting them the fertile land of Goshen. There they flourished, tending their herds and growing in number. Pharaoh saw Joseph's wisdom not only in governance, but in his loyalty to family, and he honored him all the more. Years passed, and Jacob lived out his days in peace, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Before his death, he blessed each of his sons, bestowing special favor upon Ephraim and Manasseh, Joseph's sons, granting them inheritance among his own children. Upon Jacob's passing, Joseph's brothers once again feared that he might seek retribution. They approached him with humility, saying, "Now that our father is gone, please forgive us for the wrongs we committed against you." Joseph wept at their words. "Do not be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended harm, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your children." With those words, Joseph reassured his brothers, not only with kindness, but with unwavering love. He had long since released his bitterness, understanding that every trial, every hardship, was a stepping stone in a divine plan greater than himself. Joseph continued to rule in Egypt for many years, respected and loved by the people. He lived to see his great-grandchildren, a testimony to a life of faith and endurance. When his time came, he called his family together and made them promise to one day carry his bones back to the land of his ancestors, for he knew that God's promise to Israel would one day be fulfilled. As Joseph passed peacefully, he left behind a legacy of perseverance, wisdom, and forgiveness. His story, one of betrayal, suffering, redemption, and divine purpose, became an everlasting testament to the power of faith, the strength of forgiveness, and the undeniable truth that even in the darkest of times, God's hand is at work. Joseph's legacy did not end with his death. It continued through the generations, shaping the destiny of his people. His life was a testament to resilience, faith, and divine purpose. He had faced betrayal, endured suffering, and emerged as a leader who saved countless lives. His influence extended far beyond his immediate family, reaching into the very fabric of Egyptian society and the future of the Israelite nation. As Joseph had predicted, the famine eventually ended, and Egypt returned to prosperity. The Israelites, under his protection, continued to thrive in Goshen. They became numerous, establishing a strong presence in the land. For many years, they lived in peace, respected as the kin of the great governor who had saved Egypt. Joseph's policies not only saved lives but also transformed Egypt's economy. His system of grain collection and distribution became a model of administrative excellence. He had centralized resources, ensuring that future generations would never again face a famine unprepared. His wisdom and foresight left a lasting imprint on Egyptian governance. Even as he aged, Joseph remained devoted to his people. He continued to guide them, ensuring that they maintained their faith in the God of their ancestors.